Chapter 17, Organizing Change and Stress Management. So after reading, studying, doing work in this chapter, you should be able to identify the forces that act as stimulants to change, describe the sources of resistance to change, compare the three main approaches to managing organizational change, demonstrate two ways of creating a culture for change, and identify the potential sources of consequences of stress, and describe techniques for managing stress. Okay, so we live in a world of constant change, and I could see that change is coming more quicker now than ever. Things just happen so fast that in our personal lives, in our work lives, that change is inevitable. And these are the forces that create most of the change for us. The nature of the workforce changes over time. Right now, we're undergoing a change where there are, a lot more contractors, a lot more consultants. Flexibility of the workforce is changing as far as start times, end times, things like that. The nature of what we do, moving away from manufacturing, moving more into services, moving away from more assembly into more knowledge-based employment. And also technology. As technology changes, so does the workforce. I remember when I first started working, there weren't many computers in businesses. And then suddenly there were terminals and then PCs. I remember people at work, I had been using a PC for a long time beforehand myself. But I remember older workers learning how to use a mouse at work. This is the first time they had a computer. They didn't even have one at home. So technology changes, mobile phones, internet, all of this has an impact on change. The way companies, the internet of things, that's a new term. The Internet of Things means all those smartphones and different devices connected to the internet has really jump-started a new phase in business and commerce and retail and how business is done and how work is done. Economic shocks. We had the Great Recession recently, and that changed a lot of things, including a lot of people being laid off or having to change careers. Competition, social trends, and world politics. So there are many forces that stimulate change, and the nature of these things that I had talked about create change in the workplace. And people have a natural resistance to change. So whenever change is present, there is a resistance to that change. Individuals and groups become comfortable with things that are familiar, and change threatens the status quo. There are different ways that change is resisted by employees. It's important to note that not all change is good. And not all change is bad, of course. Speed can lead to bad decisions. Sometimes those initiating coverage fail to realize the ultimate magnitude and the effect of their true costs. And change can be good, but change agents need to think carefully about the implications. So people generally resist change. In the 60s, the government was talking about limiting automation in machinery because they were afraid it would lay off too many assembly workers. In the 70s, they were talking about limiting access to computers because they were afraid computer programs would lay off too many people. And that continued into the 80s. And then in the 80s and 90s, they were talking more about robotics. And, so as these revolutions have occurred, governments have always worried about, workers are going to get laid off. There's not going to be enough jobs. But the new technologies have always replaced or created more jobs than they were replacing. So people, if you take a more positive stance to change, it's always going to be better for you and your business and your life. And even though not all change is good, if you really take a time to take advantage of the change, I think you could find something useful in it. Now, sources of resistance. There are many sources of resistance to change, as seen in this slide. And it can be taken in the form of individual resistance, such as fear of the unknown, security issues, or organizational resistance, such as the threat to enterprise, structural inertia, and limited focus on change. So, as human beings, we don't like change. Some of us hate it more than others. I know I sometimes like change. I do like to move, change my residence, change cars, but there's things I don't like to change. I do feel sad when things do change, and I often reminisce and miss things. As a human, we are a creature of habit, so we like our daily routine. Maybe there's a store we go and buy coffee every morning, and then suddenly that store is closed, and that's a stressful change for a lot of us. We can't get our coffee, but then you know what? A Starbucks opens, and we're saying, hey, this stuff, It's expensive, but it's pretty good. I'm good now. But one of the reasons we resist change is that we stick to our habits. Also, security. If you are insecure and your security as far as money, as far as your home life and different things, change can threaten you even more because you don't really have the ability to combat the change if financial costs go up. And that ties into economic fears. Is this change going to result in me having less ability and less purchasing power and less income? Fear of the unknown, that's what most people hate about change, is that you don't know what's going to happen. And selective information processing, where you're really only looking at certain things, you're not really looking at the big picture. Now, on the organizational side, some organizations have a limited focus on change management, and if there's a threat to the expertise or threat to their establishment and their power relations and their resource allocations, organizational structures may have a resistance to change as well. So we're all going to have to overcome resistance. And so let's talk about this a little bit more. Okay, so when managers face resistance to change, there are some useful tactics they can utilize to help people overcome it. So these tactics include education and communication, which I think is some of the best tactics, where you really educate the employee about what's happening, what's the meaning of it, what's the background, the history, what it means moving forward. And communication of being open and clear to the employees, I think number one is the best in overcoming resistance, is really explain and educate and communicate what's happening. Because if they can't comprehend the change, they're going to fear it. So getting people to participate in the process and building support and commitment, participation is also a critical element. So we want people to join on board with this decision, with this change, support it, and have a commitment towards it. One big changes I saw in the 90s and 2000s was companies moving away from homegrown software into ERP systems like SAP, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, Oracle, Salesforce.com, these things. So this enterprise-wide program, there were always some people who didn't get on board, who didn't participate, and they were negative about the process, hurt the process, slowed the process down, because they feared the change. They feared that this new computer system was going to threaten their job or threaten their power. And by and large, the people who didn't get on board, who didn't participate in a cooperative nature and accept this change, they systematically fell by the wayside. So I could see it in even my work experience when people don't really, if the company makes a decision to change to a new way of doing things or a new software, that you really have to embrace it, try your best at it, and participate to your fullest, to have a commitment towards getting it done successfully. Otherwise, you won't share in the rewards once it's done. It's also include developing positive relationships and being sure to implement the change fairly by applying consistency or a consistent and fair process. So you really need to have the sense of fairness to when the change is going to come and who it's going to affect. So the relationships that you want to develop between you and the coworkers, you want them to be a positive association, a positive relationship to the implement of this change. It's very important that people feel included. They feel like they're going to be treated fairly. Now, so when the implementation, that's where communication is key. To make sure it's going to be implemented fairly and people are going to be able to maintain and improve their work life, that's going to be critical to making the change. Now, using manipulation and co-optization is a different type of spin to gain cooperation. And selecting people from the beginning who are, it's basically you're manipulating people by telling them lies or half-truths, or co-opting them into doing what you want by promising them things, or saying that oh yeah, and we're gonna hire these new people and train them. Don't worry, your job's not threatened, and you may be even promoted to be in charge of them. But really, you're just training your replacements. You don't know. So there could be, when the change is going to be very negative for the person, a lot of times the managers may choose to manipulate or use other means to get you to participate and buy into the change, because in the end they know it's really not in your best interest to do so. So they're going to try and trick you, and that's a a really unethical and tricky management decision to make. So selecting the people who accept the change. So you want to find from the beginning people who are more willing to accept the change, get them on board to be cheerleaders and to be motivational, positive forces for the change is critical. And lastly, a manager can resort to coercion. So this is a tactic that directly threats or forces people to make the change, and sometimes the option is not good. And basically, let's say, like, either you take a pay cut, or or we're going to move the factory to Mexico. Things like that, where you're really threatening them, forcing them to accept the change, which is probably the worst option to do. People don't like to feel threatened or forced. So approaches to managing organizational change. There are 3 main approaches to managing organizational change. The Lewin's 3-step model to change, Kotter's 8-step model to change process, organizational development, and organizational development is the last one. So let's look at each of these. So Lewin's 3-step model offers there's 3 steps to help facilitate change process. He sets forth that change effort, the change effort needs to unfreeze individual resistance and group conformity to help move them forward, and then you will need to unfreeze the change by rebalancing and driving the restraining forces. And this will help to move people through the change process and solidify the desired behaviors, outcomes moving forward. So basically, that's his process. Now, let's talk about the unfreezing. In the unfreezing stage, you identify drivers and restraining forces. So the driving forces are those that direct behavior away from the status quo, and restraining forces are those that hinder movement from the existing equilibrium. So we have these restraining forces and the driving forces. So over time, we need to kind of break free of these to get to the desired state. And that would be sort of, this is a freeze. We're frozen here. We want to unfreeze that situation. Now, Kotter's 8-step also offers a model to look at change that builds an initial idea of Lewin's. He sets forth the following 8 steps. So we want to create urgency, that the change needs to occur and quickly. Oops, sorry. 2, we want to create a form of coalition of people who are going to get this change established and set up. We want to create a vision of why this change is important, why it's a necessary change, and we want to communicate the vision as part of the unfreezing process, to communicate the vision to the people who it's going to affect, or why it's the right thing to do. Empower others to incentivize them to make the changes, and then reward the wins and reward the successes of the steps in making the changes, and consolidate the improvements, so the movement. And finally, the refreezing is reinforce the change, and basically reestablish, reinforce, and redefine the change. So the organizational development as the last model we're going to look at. So organizational development is an area of study that is set up to determine what an organization needs to improve the effectiveness and employee well-being. Some organizational development values include respect for people, trust and support, power, equalization, confrontation, and participation. So, it's using a bunch of different methods to try and improve the organization's ability to affect change and maintain the employees' well-being during the change, to keep them satisfied and participating until the change is done. So these humanistic, democratic values, it's based on this trust, the support. It's based on participation. So all these things that kind of the organization needs to establish to get change to be effective. Now, the OD, and OD comes from organizational development intervention. So one, there's 5 commonly used organizational development techniques. So the first technique is the survey feedback approach, where the organization will use a questionnaire to identify discrepancies among members, perceptions, and follow up with discussions and plans for improvement. Process consultation is the second technique. This method involves a consultant who gives clients some insight into what is happening in the organization and helps them identify a process for improvement. The third technique is engaging in team building tools to increase trust and openness among increased interactions. Think of that classic of, one person's falling backwards and the group is there to catch them as a team building. Intergroup development is an organizational development tool that attempts to change the attitudes, stereotypes, and perceptions that groups have for each other. And finally, appreciative inquiry. In this process seeks to identify the unique qualities and special strengths of an organization, which are used to build on to improve performance through a process. And the process includes discovery, identifying the strengths of the organization, dreaming, speculating on the future of the organization, designing, finding a common vision, and destiny, deciding how to fulfill the dream. So that would be the interventions of the organizational behavior development. Okay. Right. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Stimulating a culture of innovation. So innovation is what, helps to lead to change. So innovation is a new idea applied to existing processes or services or a product, and we're trying to improve or initiate some sort of new elements or new product or process or service. So we want to innovate and we want to make things better. So the sources of innovation can be structure, culture, and human resources. So innovation is a new idea applied to the beginning or improvement of a product, process, or service. So innovations can range from small incremental improvements to radical breakthroughs. Organizations can seek innovation through creating an environment where the culture is a culture of creativity, and it's encouraged, and you're hiring an innovative workforce, and you're cultivating a group of people who are innovative and know how to get things done. Now, in order from an idea to go to an innovation to go to a final product, we have what we call idea champions. So for innovation to occur, there needs to be an idea champion who actively promotes the vision. So an idea champion is someone who actively and enthusiastically promotes an idea, builds support, overcomes resistance, and ensures that innovation is implemented. A manager must have a high energy and be willing to accept risk, and they must use inspiration and vision to gain commitment and have the authority to make decisions. So effective managers alter their organization's championing strategies to reflect the cultural values. And in a collective culture, the cross-functional approach might be more effective. For example, similarly, in a high-powered distance culture, idea champions might work closely with supervisors to get approval for innovative activity before the work begins. So really, what is this in simple terms? Somebody they have the innovation idea and they don't let it die. They move it forward. They enthusiastically bring it up, show it, support it, research it, show how it can be an improvement, and they just don't give up on it. They keep moving it. They believe in it. They have faith in it, and they keep moving it forward. Okay, let's talk about work stress. This is something we can all have in common. Stress in the workplace. Now, stress can be good, it can be bad, but it's basically when change occurs, stress is found throughout the organization. So stress is defined as a dynamic condition in which individuals confront an opportunity, demand, or resource related to what he or she desires, and for that the outcome is then perceived to be both uncertain and important. So we've all been in stressful situations, and stress at work is compounded because you have to deal with a lot of different people. You have your work that you have to deal with. Sometimes you're getting new work, or your work is changing, or the company's changing, or a merger and acquisition, or a new employee is being hired, or someone's being promoted over you, or you're getting more people to work under you. These are all stress situations. So change, we're creatures of habit. We like our comforts. We like things to stay the same. We feel very relaxed and comfortable in that state. When change occurs, we get stressed. And types of work stress, the challenge stress associated with new workload or new tasks or learning new things. Everything can be positive. You have a little stress at work, keeps work interesting. I'd rather be busy at work with lots of stuff to do and changes than bored with very little work and doing the same thing every day. The monotony of that is worse. So I found that a little work stress is good to keep you active and engaged and motivated and learning new things and keeps work interesting. Now there's hindrance stress, which comes from obstacles to try to achieve something. So if you've ever been to the DMV, you know what the hindrance stress is when you're trying to do something, you don't have the right form, you have to go back and wait online, and you have to make phone calls. It's stressful and it's hard. So usually stress is associated with demands and resources. So responsibilities, pressures, obligations, and uncertainties individuals face in the workplace are the demands, and the resources are individuals' ability to control and how we can use resources to resolve the demands. If there's more work to do, you have the resources of bringing more people in to do the work, that type of thing. Okay. So the consequences of stress. Stress shows itself in many different ways, such as high blood pressure, ulcers, irritability, difficult to make routine decisions, loss of appetite, accident proneness, and so on. So these symptoms fit into 3 generalized categories: psychological, behavioral, and okay, let's try it again. Physiological, which is the body; psychological, which is the brain; and behavioral, which is your expression of your behavior while impacted under these stress. Now, managing stress as an individual, if you feel stressed, there are different things you can certainly do to manage your stress, as far as time management, being more effective use of your time so that you can get more things done in less time and you become more efficient, and just better use of how you structure your use of time. Because a lack of time can be very stressful. We all know that when we're rushing to get to work on time, it's very stressful. So if you feel stressed in the morning because you're rushing to get ready, try getting up 20 minutes earlier. Physical activity. Working out is a great stress reliever. We all know this. Relaxation techniques, meditation, massage, your perspective, your expectations, your attitudes. These are all different things you can adjust to set yourself up to be in a more relaxed state. Social support network, having friends and family and people you can talk to about your issues and your stress. Now, organizational, so, stress needs to be managed and maintained at a healthy level. So individuals have, which I just described, have different ways of doing it, but organizations can also help employees manage stress by providing them training, goal setting, designing of jobs, offering employee sabbaticals, and establishing a wellness program. So these are things that companies can do to help employees maintain a healthy stress level. And if you have the best thing to do is have a manager that's perceptive. You can see when you're under stress. You can offer some support, help, or advice to kind of reduce that. And the more stress is managed, the better stress is managed by employees, the better the organizational environment and culture will be. What does this mean for managers? So change is inevitable, especially in today's market. So it's critical that managers have the skills to deal with it and its implications in every aspect of the organizational behavior. So if an organization is to remain competitive, it must learn to operate in a change environment, and managers must take on the role of change agents to be champions for this innovation. So as a manager, you have to really recognize and manage the change in your organization to help your employees get through it. You have to be the role model to be the change agent that's going to set up the upper management's policies and practices, and determine how you want your organization and your employees to adapt. You have to know how to moderate and control stress within the organization and your employees, help alleviate harmful workplace stress and replace it with productive and cooperative workplace stress, and identify extreme stress that can cause turnovers, accident rates, health-related problems, dangerous work environments. So these are all things that managers have to really look at in stress management and change management. But keep in mind, organizations and their members, they're going to resist change. So it is unlikely that any one approach is going to be the best fit for one company, so many different approaches have to be applied. So change is often stressful, but not all stress is harmful to you. Sometimes it's helpful. So it's typical for organizations and their members to resist the change, and if you want to organize it and handle it effectively, each individual may approach these change from a different perspective. So managers really have to be aware of that to make the change successful. Okay, so in summary, we've identified the forces that act as stimulants to change. We described the sources of resistance to change. We compared the four main approaches to managing organizational change. We demonstrated two ways to create a culture of change, and we identified the potential sources and consequences of stress and described techniques for managing stress. So to summarize this chapter, if you want to be a successful manager or a successful employee working in a successful organization, those three things have something in common. Successful organization, successful managers, and successful employees all can deal with change and stress effectively. They can take change head on, see a positive in it, accept it, and work towards reducing the stress that the change is going to cause. And the critical thing is that the organization is communicating the need for the change to the managers, and the managers are effectively communicating and educating the employees to why these changes are occurring. So, it's all about communication, trust, perspective, attitudes, and companies that have healthier stances on these pillars will have a better change management, will be more adaptive, and corporations have to adapt and have to change quickly, and employees need to be right in there supporting, helping, and facilitating these changes. And it's a changing world. We don't have organizations where employees stay one career for the whole life. Employees are going to have multiple careers. Jobs are going to come and go. Organizations are going to be open and close, merge, or break apart, and all these changes are going to happen very rapidly, and employees need to be able to deal with it. Now, the best thing for dealing with change and the stresses of change is that you just get used to change. If you're someone who moves around a lot, you just get used to moving. It's no big deal when you have to move. Versus someone who only moves once every 20 years or once every 30 years. So it's really about also being used to having changes occurring and being comfortable with change itself. Okay, so thank you for staying to the end of this lecture. I hope you had an informative time, and I will talk to you soon.